decided to create a new series, bringing to life the rolls of honor for the fallen of the Rhodesian Bush War. In many ways, I think this series will be more important than our series, The Fighting Men of Rhodesia, where people talk about their own experiences during the war in the various units. Instead, we will be inviting people to bring to life the names that are written in the various rolls of honor, and in that way to honor our fallen who cannot speak for themselves. We also hope to produce a similar series in the same vein for the commercial farmers who died. And this effort has been given support from people like Jeremy Strong and Pat Lawless, and we will be commencing this series today with a talk by Russell Fulton.
So thank you to John Von Sale, who came up with this Remembrance initiative. I don't believe that there are any viewers out there who will disagree about the importance of remembrance. So well done, John. Makorokoto Shamari. What I'm going to do today is talk to the three lives of guys that I met on regular selection board and officer cadet course. I'll just give you a little bit of a background so that you understand why it is that I've chosen to speak about these three. We attended course INF 25-21, which was the last 13-month regular cadet course run by the Rhodesian Army. At our officer selection board, there were, I think it was 143 candidates who attended. 35 were successful in passing the selection, and after a pretty grueling 13-month course, 17 of us were commissioned. These three guys, I'll speak to each one of them and try and paint a bit of a picture about the personality behind their name. Just before I get into that, I'll just read something that Brigadier Pat Lawless, who's a wonderful, respected friend, who's probably known to all of you as the holder of the Silver Cross of Rhodesia. He earned that as a subaltern in Support Company 1RAR. He was the last officer in our regiment to receive, or in the 1st Battalion rather, to receive that decoration. This comes from an anecdote that Pat wrote for a book that Andy Telfer and I co-authored, or one of two, Chibaya Moyo 2, and it's entitled Tough Day at the Office. It's about Lieutenant Jim Hardy, an Australian guy who came over and joined our army and our battalion and was killed in action. And this sums up what the loss of a brother and friend means. There can be fewer, more difficult events to comprehend than to see a close friend killed at close range. So I'll get into my eulogy now. The first is 781-339, Second Lieutenant John William Walters. John died on active service on the 27th of May, 1979. John is an old Prenician and, if I'm not mistaken, was a boarder at Gall House. John was the eldest of three brothers. Michael Lane and Stephen Thomas were the other two in order of age. Mick, the middle brother, attended course INF 25-18 and was commissioned into 1 Commando, 1 RLI. After leaving Plumtree, John joined the Internal Affairs as a cadet. And then in 1977, he attended our officer selection board, which commenced on the 25th of January, 1978. John was at age 26, 27, if I'm not mistaken, at that point, and arguably the oldest regular officer cadet. At the end of our 13-month course, John was assessed as the candidate most likely to succeed as an officer for outstanding work throughout that 13 months, and was rightly awarded our course's Sword of Honor. Those former cadets and those in the officer fraternity will understand how big a deal a Sword of Honor is. John was a large guy, a little bit maybe overweight, and certainly not as fit as his younger course candidates or friends. But John was a tough guy, and he, despite difficulties and challenges on the physical front, he persevered. During the first phase of our cadet course, towards the end of it, that phase, we had the fabled endurance exercise. This is a really tough course, both physically and mentally demanding. After 5 days of marching, and it would be in the order of 50 to 60 kilometers a day that we would have to march, all the while being assessed by an officer. There was a staged capture at Paraffin Mine in the Seleuqui Hills, and what happened when we were captured is we were stripped of all of the clothing that we had worn up to that point, and we were given a pair of army camouflage trousers that were probably 3 or 4 sizes too big. No boots, no socks, just completely stripped, and all we wore were those trousers. On each trouser was a piece of white cloth, flannel, that had a number embossed onto it. What they then did was they placed camouflaged hoods over our heads, and we were handcuffed behind our backs. I'll just show you. That would be the accepted way of handcuffing, but that wasn't how it was done with us. We had one hand forward and one reversed behind our back. Really uncomfortable. Anyway, once we'd been hooded and handcuffed, some of us who resisted got a little bit of extra attention, and that came in the form of leg irons, manacles. We were then laid down. It was pretty hot, but we were laid down, face down, on the ground in an area completely exposed to the sun, no shade. And we laid there for a number of hours. During this time, obviously, we became sunburnt, which was all part of the great plan for what lay ahead that evening. I must say, during those probably 4-5 hours that we were lying in the sun, we were spaced far enough apart to give us the impression that we were on our own. We weren't allowed to speak, otherwise you got a good clip around the ear. So it was all to do with mind games. That sense of feeling alone, not being able to see where you were, it was pretty uncomfortable. There were a few cadets at that point who asked to be withdrawn from the course and were. By late afternoon, as the sun was starting to dip, those who are familiar with the Midlands will know that it gets pretty fresh there in winter. And I think by design, our course was scheduled so that we would get a taste of the Midlands winter. So anyway, as the sun started to dip, each one of us was taken one by one, and we were placed in a disused mine pit that was full of red mud, as it turns out. The next day we saw it, but ankle to calf deep. When we were placed in this pit, we were all we had to stand. We were all faced towards the sun. and all we could see through the hood was an orange glow. So that gave us a sense, to some degree anyway, that what the time was. As the sun dipped, so too was the onset of the cold. Uh, Again, in this pit, we were spaced far enough apart that you had that sense that you were alone. Unbeknownst to any of us, John had commenced the endurance exercise some 5 days prior with kidney stones. And what happened in the coming hours was a real test of his mental fortitude and physical resolve to want to try and push through. After a couple of hours in that pit, we had demonstration company who were part of the RAR and based out at Guinea Fowl. These guys would come down almost clockwork every 15 minutes, half an hour. They'd come down with a galvanized bucket filled with water, and one of those Kango aluminium mugs lying on the bottom, and you could hear it when they were walking towards the pit. And what they did was, because we had no shirts and we'd been sunburnt, on our stomach, on our back, on our stomach, like a roast, to make sure that both front and back were appropriately sunburnt. They started to pour water across our shoulders, then over our hood, and then they would come to the front and then throw it across our chest and down the front of our trousers. And this went on for a number of hours. So a few hours into this, John started to complain about his kidney stones. And as I said, none of us were aware that he had this problem. With the onset of John complaining, there were probably 3 or 4 guys who, again, like those when we were out in the sun, had started to complain and had requested that they be withdrawn from the course. So when John started to complain, I think those complaints fell on deaf ears, and those of us who knew John well knew that if he was complaining, there was a bloody good reason behind it. And so we added voice to his, and we started calling for our course officer, Martin Wake, and or duty medic or doctor who we assumed would have been in pretty close proximity. Anyway, for our involvement and talking out of turn, we got slapped around the face, which pissed us off somewhat. Anyway, John was removed from the pit, and he was recovered back to the MRI room at the School of Inf, and that was pretty much the end of the endurance exercise for John. Why do I tell you about that? To have endured what John did for 5 days, and then to essentially put up with a good 10, 12 hours of what we've been subjected to that point is a credit to the man. Great courage. I've never had kidney stones, but I understand that they are extremely painful. Anyway, just to move on. When John and the rest of us completed our cadet course, we were requested, or required rather, to write the names of 3 units that we would like to serve in. And John had selected the RLI, and he and Steve, his brother, who was my best friend on cadet course, they got their wish and were posted to RLI. John was posted to Commando. I was on deployment in Op Hurricane, and we were operating out of Jock Motoko. I came back from deployment 10-day thing, and after my debrief, I went to the signals vehicle and I grabbed hold of the file that contained all of the past 2 weeks SITREPs and Noticas signals. And I made my way to the Jock Motoko officers' mess, where I sat down and ordered a couple of beers. They had an old radiogram there. Those buggers who spend time at Motoko will know all about that that gram. And there are a whole bunch of pretty badly scratched LPs as well. So I pulled the Carpenter's LP out and I put that on, and then sat down and I started reading the sit reps. And then I came across the note he has about John. John was killed in a vehicle accident in Up Thrasher. I've heard a lot of stories from a lot of different folks about what actually happened there, and I'm not going to speculate on that. It serves no purpose. John was killed 3 months after his commissioning. He was an outstanding guy. To this very day, if I hear Karen Carpenter singing that song that I heard when I read about John, it makes me weep. The second man that I'm going to talk about is 781343 Second Lieutenant Bruce Fraser Burns. Bruce was killed in action up Burik and while serving with 1 Engineer Squadron. The date was 6th of September 1979. As I recall, Bruce, who was a few years older than me, had also attended Plumtree, where, from what I've been able to dig up, was a boarder at Milne House and the only son to his parents. Bruce left Rhodesia and he spent a number of years serving in the South African Merchant Navy. When he returned to Rhodesia, he attended our officer selection board and our cadet course. At best, Bruce was a pretty quiet, reserved guy, thick-set, but a really good guy, intelligent man. On commissioning, Bruce had and his best mate from course, Alistair Cameron, requested and received postings to the engineers. Bruce was killed in action 7 months after our commissioning, and he was killed one of 14 Rhodesians and South African Air Force personnel who were killed in Puma 164. I'm sure a great many, if not all of you, know about Puma 164 and or have read the book written by Rick Van Malsen, Neil Jackson, and a few other good guys that records the story leading up to that fateful event. What I do know is whilst on Opurik, their task, the engineers, was to drop strategic targets, bridges, and the like. And on board Puma 164 were a whole lot of RLI guys, 3 engineers, I think, and then South African Air Force crew. They apparently were coming into land on Puma 164, and those who've flown in a Puma will know that they're really fast. And when they come into land, they flare their belly and then come in. Whilst that was happening, they were hit, apparently, directly behind the pilot seat by an RPG-7. the aircraft went down, and because of the explosives and so on, you can imagine that there was not a great deal left after the fact. The bodies that could be recovered were recovered and were laid out with the intention of returning to collect and return in pure Rhodesia. Sadly, that never happened. They were never repatriated back to Rhodesia. Not once during our 13-month cadet course did I ever hear Bruce complain about anything. Never lost his temper. He was just an outstanding guy and a good example of an officer and a gentleman. The final guy that I'm going to speak to today is 781-340 Second Lieutenant Kevin Hugh Tennant, who died on active service while serving with 3 Troop of A Squadron Grey Scouts. The date was the 2nd of October 1979. I found this piece written and posted on the Grey Scouts Facebook page by Gordy John Forey, or Forey, I'm not sure of the pronunciation, so apologies. And this was posted on the 3rd of October 2016. Canvas, as he was affectionately referred to on our cadet course and beyond, was one of this world's real characters, full of mischief and joie de vivre, and he had truckloads of personal drive. This is what Gordy Forey wrote. On the first night of an A Squadron deployment on operations, A Squadron was situated at Nunetsi in Optangent. Canvas suicided in one of the rondavels which the Grey Scouts officers had been given to stay in. Sitting on his bed and putting his Army-issue 9mm pistol in his mouth at 5:30 a.m. during first light stand 2. I was troop medic, excuse me, and Colin Hay and I were in our bivvy and on stand 2 right outside his rondavel, and we were the first in the door to assist him, having heard the gunshot and cry. A good man. Did regular officers course, having been a corporal in the RLI before his regular officers course and joining Grey Scouts as a second lieutenant. R.I.P. Canvas. I'm sorry I could not help you that tragic day, bud, and I wish I had known what was going down so I could have gotten to you sooner. 1 minute and 20 meters would have made a difference. Again, I've heard stories from a number of people surrounding the reasons why Canvas would have done what he did. That's a matter for him. A great guy also, taken way too soon. To have served in the midst of these 3 men remains one of my life's enduring privileges, and the memories of our time together remain deeply embedded in my mind and heart. In closing, a few paragraphs I shared on Facebook that sum up the import of remembrance for all of us. Once you were out there and in the thick of it, our country was merely an abstraction. What we were really doing was fighting to survive, to protect our kith and kin, our way of life, but we were also looking out for the man on either side of us. This has been the way of the military man for millennia. Consider, if you will, the Greek soldiers at the walls of Troy who really didn't care about Helen. They were fighting because they were with their brothers. On the field of battle, that was your only concern, and we did it passionately, aggressively, resolutely, and always. We defended, we avenged, and for the most part, we bled. We were prepared to die for the unique creation that was Rhodesia and our continued existence. This is about our fellow countrymen. Those were our friends and our fallen brothers. Men of men who never got the chance to experience the cycle of life, the birth and growth of their own children. They will never grow old because they chose to stand alongside their Rhodesian brothers and face our common enemy. Regardless of race, religion, tribal affiliation, ethnicity, or however you wish to characterize that. There is no greater honor than to fall for your brother. I live so those words are easy to toss out there, but I say them without equivocation. If it were me or one of my team, no question about it, I would put down my life for them. That is how we were trained and how our love for those in our midst developed. It was never in question. It is not sufficient to acknowledge our fallen by name, or simply inscribe their names in marble as proof that they lived and died. To truly honor our fallen, we must acknowledge how and why they gave their lives. Their death wasn't a random act or a splash of misfortune. A great many men voluntarily put themselves in harm's way and were prepared to die so that we could rest secure at home. They were the insurance policy that guaranteed our God-given rights, were more worthy than their own tomorrow. For the infantryman in combat, there is nobility and purpose in our lives, and that is unique. We never saw ourselves as a people apart. We were citizens of Rhodesia, and nothing more than that. Rest in heavenly peace. John, Bruce, and Canvas. And all those wonderful Rhodesian men and women who fell. That's it.